A lot of people, I think, is why do bad things happen to good people, and why is there so much suffering in the world? And because of that huge attack, I would fill myself with really worldly pleasures to try to fill these voids. And what's the most ironic part of all of this is the fact that a suffering we've had in our family has literally brought us so close to Christ. And it's so ironic because here I am saying, well, why do people suffer? Why does there have to be suffering in the world? But yet it's the suffering that we had to endure that actually brought us close to Christ. And that's what keeps really even reeling us even in more. God says, cast your sufferings upon me.
And that speaks to one of the things we discussed last week, the principle and foundation, and also introduces to what we're going to be looking at this week. In the principle and foundation, again, we're asked to be indifferent to the experiences of our life, to be like a scale and balance, not to assess it. And when we do assess it, to assess it, is this something that is drawing me closer to Christ? If so, then it's a good thing and I need to accept it. Is it something drawing me away from Christ? If not, then I need to put it aside. And the good thing, being good that it's drawing me to Christ, may be the cross at this particular moment. Maybe the cross. That's what we're going to look at today. So we've done Rule 1 and Rule 2. Before we get into Rule 3 and Rule 4, and we're going to do Rule 3, 4, 5, and 6 today, so we're doing a lot today. I want to just, again, go over some introductory terms. Rule 3 and Rule 4 talk about spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation. Consolation. Consolation in general is something happy and uplifting which instills joy and peace. But again, in the rules for the discernment of spirits, we're not just talking about any consolation, we're talking about spiritual consolations. So when we're talking about spiritual consolations, we're talking about consolations in our heart that have special significance for our life of faith and our pursuit of God's will. Non-spiritual consolations can be good and can be springboards for spiritual consolations, but in and of themselves, they're not spiritual consolations. So again, as we're looking at the different layers of the heart, different kinds of consolation also. I maybe I just, took a run and I've got all sorts of, the blood is flowing and I'm feeling really great. That's consolation. But it's not in and of itself a spiritual consolation. Spiritual consolations is what we're looking at. We're looking at the rules for the discernment of spirits. Spiritual consolations can differ in duration and intensity. A spiritual consolation can last, for a day, for a couple of days. A spiritual consolation can last for a month, for a couple of months. I can just be on this really incredible spiritual encounter with God. Spiritual consolation can be very, very subtle. Spiritual consolation can be very, very intense. Beautifully intense. And spiritual consolations can be easy or hard. A hard consolation is, again, that encounter with the cross that is somehow in that a taste of the sweetness of you being united with Christ in his pierced heart. That is somehow drawing me closer to Christ. So someone with the rules for the discernment of spirits who has good eyes, read for us rule number 3, spiritual consolation, please.
So became inflamed with the love of God. 1. Experience lasts for a time, and its spiritual benefit remains when the experience has passed. 2. Directed toward God.
No, read the rule itself, not the notes, the rule itself. Does anybody have the... Yeah, read that.
Third rule, spiritual consolation. I call a consolation an enduring movement in the soul's heart, through which the soul comes from the plane of the love of its Creator and Lord. What can a consequence love no created thing on the face of the earth in itself, but in the Creator of them all? Likewise, one sheds tears that move to the love of its Lord, whether out of sorrow for one's sins, or for the passion of Christ our Lord, or because of other things directly connected with his service and praise. Finally, I call consolation every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all material joy that calls and attracts to heavenly things, and to the salvation of one's soul, quieting it and getting at peace in its Creator and Lord.
Okay, so spiritual consolation. Again, Ignatius is giving us rules. He's saying, how do we play the game? And with rule number 1 and rule number 2, depending on which way we're going, away from God or towards God, he's giving us the uniforms. He's telling us, okay, this is what this team looks like, this is what that team looks like, so we know. In rule 3 and rule 4, he's telling us what we look like. Where am I? Because that has a part to play in all of this. It's the evil spirits, the good spirits, and my spirit engaged in this. So in the first 2 rules, he talked about the good and the evil spirits. In this, he's talking about my spirit. In what state is my spirit? Am I in spiritual consolation? Or, as we'll see in the next rule, am I in spiritual desolation? Because that makes a difference in how I respond and how I'm experiencing things. If I am in spiritual consolation, what does that look like? How can I name that in myself? He says the soul becomes inflamed with the love of God. The soul becomes inflamed with the love of God. It's an experience that lasts for a time. And its spiritual benefits remain even when the experience has passed. I'm in prayer, I'm on adoration, and there's this without any sense, without any thought, suddenly there's just this fire within me that I really sense God's presence. And I'm really responding to it. Even after I leave that holy hour, that lingers. That peace, that strength, that courage, it lingers. That spiritual consolation. And it is a consolation explicitly directed towards God. It's a consolation because I have encountered God, because I'm focused on Him, because I'm experiencing Him, because He's really taking the lead. Not because I got a good night's sleep. That's focused on me. I feel good today. No. This is a spiritual consolation. It's something focused on God. The soul becomes inflamed with the love of God. And consequently, the soul loves created things only in that they point to the Creator. So suddenly, that love that I'm experiencing, that encounter, that flame of love that I have for God is what's shaping the way I'm seeing everything around me. And the way I'm interpreting everything around me. God's Spirit is taking the lead. So I can see around me what is helping me move towards Him, and I want that all the more. I'm hungry for it. And I want it, and I can see it, and I'm going for it. We are so in love with God that nothing or no one can compete with Him. And we see everyone and everything in the context of God, the Creator, the giver of all gifts. Every good thing that I'm experiencing, I can point to God. What else does the rule say? I shed tears that move the soul to its love of God. The whole person is involved in spiritual consolation. There can be physical manifestations of spiritual consolation, but it's coming from here and moving out. Again, that heart getting bigger and bigger within. Tears. There's a sorrow for my sins, healing tears that give freedom and peace to the human heart. I see my sin only in light of my love of God and the love that I'm experiencing God give me. Which means I'm not focused on the sin in some sense of shame, but in that, wow, it's kept me from Him and how beautiful He is. And I'm again directed towards Him. Tears for the passion of the Lord. Experiencing His love and sharing in His suffering, in the suffering of the Savior. How can I face my own cross? Well, I can if I'm really encountering God, on the cross Himself and experiencing that love that He is having for me. That's a sense of spiritual consolation. And tears for other things directly or to His service and to His praise. What happens in spiritual consolation? The theological virtues are increased in me, or seem increased. They're more free within me. There's an increase in faith, hope, and charity. They're always present. They're habitually present in me. But when I'm experiencing spiritual consolation, they're just all the more free to move. And I'm living in them in a deeper sense of faith, in a deeper sense of hope, in a deeper sense of charity. And Ignatius tells us in consolation, there is an interior joy that just attracts me to heavenly things. I know I've experienced such joy in Christ, and I just want more. I want to be around people that are experiencing Christ. I want to be able to share more about my faith. I want to go to Mass. I want to sit and pray the Rosary. There's a joy about it that attracts you to it. A joy that refreshes the heart, quieting it and giving it peace in its Creator and Lord, again, directed towards God. And it pulls me up towards the beauty of heavenly things. It pulls me up towards the beauty of heavenly things. And gives me joy in serving Him. That becomes foremost in my life. All of these things are marks of spiritual consolation. Next rule, desolation, before we get into it. Again, as we said last week, when we look at Rule 1 and Rule 2, there's a principle of contrariety. If I'm moving this way, the evil spirit acts this way, and the good spirit acts that way. When I turn around, they kind of flip. Well, in Rule 3 and Rule 4, if I'm in spiritual consolation, this is what I look like. And in spiritual desolation, it flips. It flips. Desolation in general is a condition of affective heaviness that instills sadness and depletes energy for living. Spiritual desolation is an affective heaviness and its accompanying thoughts that directly impact my faith and my pursuit of God's will. So again, when we're talking about these things, we're not just talking about the affective movements. There's reason involved here. We're talking about the use of my intellect, the thoughts that can flow out of those affective movements. God gives us spiritual consolation. He does not give us spiritual desolation, but He allows it. And both are lessons for us. In both, we can learn all the more to move towards God and follow Him. Spiritual consolation given by God is the first lesson, but spiritual desolation allowed by God is the second lesson that somehow helps us, that there's something in there for us to learn, to help us and strengthen us in our movements towards God. Someone please read for me rule number 4. Yes.
Spiritual desolation. I call desolation all the contrary of spiritual 1, such as darkness. 2, or soul, disturbance in it. Movement in things low and earthly is unquiet of different agitations and temptation. Moving to want of confidence, without hope, without love, when one finds oneself. While lazy, tepid, sad, and as if separated from his Creator and Lord. Because as consolation is contrary to desolation, in the same way the thoughts which come from consolation are contrary to the thoughts which come from desolation.
All right. Desolation is not pretty. It's not pretty. What does it look like? Darkness of soul, he says to us. It's the opposite of the spiritual inspiration, the spiritual clarity that we have in consolation. In desolation, there's a darkness of soul. And there's disturbance in it. The heart is troubled, it's unsettled, it's restless. When we're in spiritual desolation, we're walking in a bit of a fog. We're walking in a fog. Where suddenly it was a clear, bright day, and I could clearly see the beauty around me, suddenly there's just a fog that has come in, and all I see is this blanket of light, and I can't really tell much beyond that. And so that has me feel helpless, kind of caught. disturbed, troubled, unsettled, restless. I can't quite sense where I am or where I'm going. Whereas in consolation, I'm lifted by joy to the beautiful things of heaven. In desolation, suddenly I move to low and earthly things. I sense no attraction to prayer, to scripture, to God's service. It suddenly becomes kind of dry for me. Prayer is dry. I'm not getting the same kind of joy that I thought I was getting out of serving people or going to my Bible study or doing this or that or even coming to Mass every day. I just don't feel like it anymore. I'm drawn to material comforts, to gratification of the body, to memories from the past. I remember back in the day, when I was moving away from God, boy, I was having fun. And I forget about that. Oh, wait, at the end of the day, I was empty. No, I kind of forget that part. I was having fun. There's a sadness, not towards the things of God, but towards the things that I'm missing that were taking me away from God. Suddenly, those memories start to come back. I'm immersed in trivia, pettiness. Oh, that gets us easily. There's 100 good things going on in the parish, but there's a crack in that sidewalk right there. Why is no one dealing with it? Look at this crack in the sidewalk. Someone could die. Pettiness, trivia. I'm distracted by the media, the internet, by superficial conversations. I experience disquiet from various agitations and temptations. On a spiritual level, my patience is thin. I'm easily agitated. Easily agitated. I am moved to a lack of confidence. Seemingly without hope and love. There seems to be a decrease in the conscious felt experiences of the virtues of faith, hope, and love. They don't actually decrease, but for whatever reason, I'm not connected to them. I don't experience that sense of faith. God, are you really loving? God, do you really forgive me? I don't know. That sense of faith is disconnected. Can I really get through this? Is there really hope? Does God really want me to get to heaven? I don't know. I don't know. There's a lack of that somehow, a disconnection from that. And so because of that, I find myself slothful, tepid, sad. And these attitudes seem to dominate. Slothful, particularly towards spiritual things. Acadia. Slothful specifically towards spiritual things. In this, emotional and psychological awareness is very, very important. Again, is what I'm experiencing affecting me spiritually? Or is it a psychological movement that needs to be addressed there? And it may be both. One may be impacting the other. But I need to address them at their proper levels. Their proper levels. You feel as if you're somehow separated from your Creator and Lord. God feels far from you. Which is just the opposite of the truth that we mentioned in the principle and foundation. God is very connected, very involved in our lives. But when we're in desolation, we don't experience that affectively. We don't experience it that way. Mother Teresa experienced a desolation that lasted for 40 years. She did not experience God's love affectively. She only had in her will to know that it was there. But she felt herself in darkness. You feel separated from God. There's a sense of a loss of identity. I don't see myself as finding my identity in God's love for me because I'm not experiencing that love. So I start to talk about the kind of person I am. Well, you know how I am. And the lie takes What a person feels in desolation and says that's who the person is. I feel like garbage. I am garbage.
Wouldn't that be part of growth? Isn't that what everyone goes through in their spiritual journey?
Yes. We're supposed to experience both of these. Again, they're both lessons that we're supposed to learn. But Rule 3 and Rule 4 are telling me how to name that. And then the other rules are going to tell me, okay, if I'm experiencing this, how is the evil one going to act and how do I respond? So these, again, the first 4 rules are basically setting the stage. The first 2 talking about the good spirit and the evil spirit. Rule 3 and Rule 4 talking about me and the state I'm in. Am I in consolation or am I in desolation? Because depending on where I am, depends, again, with that principle of contrariety, how the spirits are going to act and how I need to respond. Questions, doubts, and confusions on spiritual consolation and spiritual desolation before we move forward? Yes?
Why is it would people in the world call spiritual desolation depression?
Okay, and again, would people in the world call spiritual desolation depression? Okay. They may, and we can say, again, there are distinct levels. And I may be experiencing clinical depression, or I may be, which is happening on a psychological level. I may be experiencing just a sadness over something that's not spiritual, on that emotional level. And I need to address that at those levels. But if those levels start to impact in some way my life of prayer, then it's not necessarily one or the other. It can be both. It can be both. And I can experience desolation, spiritual desolation, without being depressed, without being clinically depressed. There can be something else happening there that's not in that. So it doesn't have to be both. Only you can have. We would believe that there can be a spiritual desolation that is not depression. That's something distinct. And so you can have one without the other, but you can also have both simultaneously. But they need to be addressed in their proper form, in their proper place. Other questions? Good question. Yes.
In regard to consolation, you were saying that that's just our yearning and our desire to seek God only and not in His creatures. But wouldn't that love that we would seek and that we would feel, inflamed in our hearts, wouldn't that overflow to other creatures though as well?
Well, exactly. That's what the rule says. And I see created reality. In created reality, I see the presence of God, and I see what is precisely guiding me towards that. I'm very easily connected. Again, the fog isn't there. I see the beauty of the tree and the sunset and the person who's in front of me. Or even the struggle. I see in that something pointing me towards God. Yes, sir.
I'd like to draw. I read, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it's actually, to me, there's something very, very powerful about the Hebrews on their journey from slavery to the promised land, and that is that I see it symbolically as as they're going towards the sea. And actually, this is in a book I read, that the people chasing them, the Pharaoh, the army, and so forth, represent evil spirits. And when they get to the Red Sea and it parts, they represent baptism. And evil spirits are drowned. And then they get into their first oasis, and that's the first stage in the spiritual life. Where they're real happy and joyful and so forth and so on. And then it's time to move on, but you got to go to the desert to get to the next spiritual level.
Yes, and very good. Yeah, I would say it's very much an analogy of our journey of faith as it was for them. But what happened when they got to the desert? They grumbled and they said, we were better off in slavery back in Egypt. So there was a sadness for what they were missing, even though it was slavery. Same evil one that they talk about in Scripture is the one that's messing with us today. One that's messing with us today. And Ignatius wrote these things 500 years ago. Same evil one, same Holy Spirit, same human person. at the core, same human person. That's why these are so rich. Yes?
On these three levels, anybody who's experienced the death,
Anybody who's experienced?
someone losing a loved one.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so that is a desolation, you're depressed, I mean, you're upset. but
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna ruin you spiritually.
Correct.
Right? And it's the difference of how people handle
Sure.
lost loved ones,
Yes.
right? And some, I mean, you got the human level, the spiritual level, and then the psychological level, right?
Right.
So the ones who are close with Christ and have been in consolation are gonna be equipped to handle it. That's why some people
Correct,
try to
yes.
get through it and others
Yes.
don't, right?
Right. Right. Yes.
Yeah, there's mainly a flow.
Yes.
Is this dark night of the soul, which many of us think is that a gift from God?
It's something allowed by God for our good. Yes. For a lesson for us. Yes. The dark night of the soul is different from spiritual desolation. In that it's, I mean, certainly it's an extreme desolation perhaps, but it's something in and of itself that people are called to, but even people who are not called to, who are not that far into the experience of the spiritual journey, will still be experiencing desolation, which I think can be, somewhat can be said to be a taste of that, of what Teresa of Avila experienced, what John of the Cross experienced. It's a taste of that, but their experience of that is even more than what most of us would experience in day to day, year to year on a regular life journey, desolation. But yes, it's something allowed by God to help us, to teach us. So the spiritual life is a movement back and forth between consolation and desolation. And just as consolations can be experienced at various intensities, so can desolation be experienced at various intensities. So just because I'm experiencing desolation doesn't mean, well, there's nothing I can do about this. Fulton Sheen, let me see if I can remember the quote. It says, more men find their identity, something to that effect. More men find themselves in darkness rather than light. Which is not to ask for the darkness, but simply to say that the darkness need not go to waste. Something to that effect. I'm not getting it quite right. But that even in that spiritual darkness, that is spiritual desolation, there is a lesson. There is a lesson for me to learn if I can respond rightly to the way God's Spirit is guiding me through to teach me that lesson. Yes.
I'm sensing something here, this may be my problem more than what I'll just say. Is this an isolated journey? How much should I have this effort to stay on this track to God? Are we making it together? Are we making it, I can depend on this lady, I can depend on you, others, if I'm willing to speak? And I'm sorry. I was brought to this question, thinking about something I read, Fulton was saying, that the greatest difficulty or misery is loneliness now. And I have to say, if I were needing help, it would take a lot of courage for me to go
Right.
and say, I know we're good Catholics, okay, but sometimes good Catholics have a lot of problems.
Well, it's a very good question. It's an important question. And, the way the Holy Spirit is acting towards me is precisely the way He's acting towards me. So in a sense, that's my relationship with Him. I'm a unique, unrepeatable value. And God is going to love me and guide me in a way that is for me. But one of my favorite quotes from Pope Benedict XVI, he said to the kids at World Youth Day one year, you cannot follow Jesus alone. We cannot follow Jesus alone. We are a communal people. And so we do need each other. We need, when I was working with the university students, I mean, you know, they're at UM is, you know, UM is really expensive. And, you know, a lot of these kids are coming from families who, you know, their parents are big shots in business and industry and this, that, and the other thing, and very much coming out of that world where I am what I do. And that means, you know, you have to have the mask on all the time. You have to have it on all the time. And that's exhausting for these kids. They're 18 years old and they're absolutely exhausted because if I'm not absolutely perfect, I won't be loved. If I'm not getting straight A's, Mommy and Daddy won't love me. And when they got to the point in the ministry, campus ministry, where they realized, oh, you mean y'all are just as messed up as I am? Oh, let's take these masks off and relax a little bit. And suddenly they were able to be vulnerable with each other appropriately. You know, I mean, they're not each other's confessors, but you know, to be able to say, okay, we're sharing this, we're all going through this. And you know, when I'm in desolation, I need you who are in consolation to lean on and to help me. And you know what? 3 months from now, I may be the one in consolation, you're in desolation, and guess what? I'm here for you. So yes, we do need each other. And we need, you know, like, we need to, you know, in appropriate levels, in appropriate ways, you know, disclose and share the journey with each other. And recognize we are all sinners moving towards, desiring to move towards God. But we need help along the way. So yeah, so very much, like, I need to know not only how does the evil one act in general, but what's the numbers he usually use on me because they just work on me better than they work on the guy next to me. So I need to know my own journey as well, but I'm not taking that journey in isolation. It's together with others who are on similar journeys, though their own are unique to them. All right. If I am in desolation, the rest of the rules for the first week are basically going to say how do you deal with it if you're on desolation. The rules were written for the spiritual exercises, which is a retreat that Ignatius put together, that if you take it in consecutively, it's about 30 days. 30-day silent retreat. So he said these rules, the rules that we're looking at, are rules most appropriate for the first week, for the beginning of the retreat. Because again, if I'm moving towards God, the enemy's going to be on the attack and not wanting that to happen, and I'm probably going to be experiencing desolation in the midst of that. There's another set of rules that we're not looking at in this series that are rules more appropriate for the second week, he says, and then for later in the retreat, again when I'm experiencing more consolations. But these rules that we're going to begin to look at are more specific about being in desolation. If I'm in desolation, what are some of the things that the evil one is going to do and act, and how am I to respond? How do I play the game? Okay. So, rule number 5. Somebody read rule number 5 for me.
I'll give it another chance.
Go for it.
Okay. In times of desolation, never to make a change, but to be firm and constant in the resolutions and determinations, in which one was the day preceding such desolation, or in the determination in which he was in the preceding consolation. Because, as in consolation, it is rather the good spirit who guides and counsels us. So in desolation, it is the bad, with whose counsels we cannot take a course to decide rightly.
So basically, in desolation, do not make a change from something you had decided while in consolation, or that you decided before the desolation set in. Make no change. I can give you an example of my own life. There was, a number of years ago, I had to go out to Omaha for a board meeting for the Institute for Priestly Formation, which is the people that came up with this whole concept, out in Omaha Creighton University. And the week leading into it was just horrible. I was in horrible spiritual desolation. And it just major, like really strong attack. And I did not feel like going on that trip. I did not feel like going all the way out there, changing time zones, going, it was probably, I think it was February, so it was gonna be chilly, and I seriously did not want to go, and really, really felt a strong tug to cancel the trip. The only thing, and it was strong, the only thing that got me on that plane was rule number 5. That was the only thing that got me on that plane. Because I had decided in consolation, I'm supposed to go to this meeting. And let me tell you, I had a couple of conversations out there that led to life-changing experiences. The evil one didn't want me to have those. And so in desolation, he was trying to get me to change my mind. Why should I not change my mind? Because in consolation, it's the good spirit that takes the lead. It's the good spirit that counsels. But in desolation, God kind of steps back and he allows. Like the book of Job. All right, do what you want, but spare his life. So who takes the lead when I'm in desolation? The evil spirit, who is the prince of lies. Who is the prince of lies. This rule has 2 parts. The first gives a guideline, and the second explains why. The rule applies to a person now experiencing desolation. I'm in desolation now. And I should never change a proposal made during consolation. The word is categorical. It allows for no exception. He was very specific. Never make a change. Never. He's very to something that had been decided when I was in consolation or before the desolation came in. Why? Again, because it's the evil spirit that's taking the lead. And it's not just the affect of desolation. It's not just the affects that I'm experiencing in these spiritual movements. It's the thoughts that flow out of them that I need to be careful of. And the thoughts that are flowing out of my affective experience of desolation are being guided by the evil one who can't be trusted. Because he's the prince of lies. He's the prince of lies. So, let's say I decided to go on the parish mission for Lent. But then I'm sensing, I don't want to go, I don't feel like it, it's going to take so much time, I don't want to drive that late. I have a sense, am I experiencing spiritual desolation? And did that spiritual desolation come into play after I had decided I'm going to the mission? If so, I should go to the mission. That's what this rule is telling me. Make no change. Rule number 6. Somebody read it for me.
Although in desolation, we ought not change our first resolutions, it is very helpful intensely to change ourselves against the same desolation, as by insisting more on prayer, meditation, on much examination, and by giving ourselves more scope in some subtle way of doing penance.
All right. So, in desolation, I should not change my prior resolutions, prior decisions. But I ought to change myself. I ought to change what I'm doing. We are not called to endure spiritual desolation passively. To just be the doormat and the wall all over us. Ignatius reminds us, you have tools to fight this. You have tools to work through this. God is allowing it, but he leaves you with your own tools that he has given you to work through it. If I am in spiritual desolation, what kind of changes can I make? Prayer. I can petition God for help. If I'm experiencing that desolation, that lack of faith, Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. Strengthen my faith in this time. Pray for it, petition it, ask for it. increase my time of prayer. If I decided every day, I'm going to pray for 30 minutes, and I just don't feel like it. I'm at 15 minutes and I want to stop. Even if you're just sitting there, go to 31 minutes. Really? Just add a little bit. And it tells the evil one. You'd be surprised. Add just a little bit. Increase prayer, even if it's just a little. But increase it with the intention of offering it to God as a help, as asking Him to help you, offering it precisely for the spiritual desolation you're experiencing. Meditation. Meditate on the truths of the faith. Turn to Scripture. Look for a light in the midst of the darkness. If the thoughts that flow from desolation are guided by the evil one, my head is filled with all these lies and negative thoughts. So the best thing I can do to help push those thoughts aside is put other thoughts in my head. Good and holy thoughts. Read the Scriptures. Do spiritual direction. Spiritual reading. Read the lives of the saints. And get my mind off of those negative thoughts coming from the evil one and fill it with thoughts about the faith and about God and about sainthood. So meditating on those things, thinking, forcing myself to think about those things, which pushes the other aside. Much examination. Increase my awareness and understanding. I need to look, okay, what is happening? How did it happen? Why am I in this? What shifted? Because I was fine last week and now suddenly I'm here. How did I get here? Bringing that to prayer and thinking about that. Increasing my awareness and my understanding. The more I understand what is at work in a particular desolation, the more I can find the appropriate measure to reject it. Not every desolation is the same. How is the evil one acting in this desolation? What are the thoughts that are coming to my head? How do I react specifically to those? Yes, sir.
True or false? You can be in desolation for a period of a couple of hours or a week. Does it vary?
Yes, it varies.
I mean, I can be in desolation over a situation that I just experienced, and then pull myself out of it, maybe go say the rosary or whatever I need.
I would say yes. Once we begin to, again, why is it good to have that awareness, to examine what's happening? That's going to teach me something. That's going to teach, okay, but if I'm in the midst of a desolation and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how did I get here? The more I learn that, the more I come to understand that, the more I'll be able to sense the warning signs that I'm starting to slip down that path and turn it off before I get there. And then he speaks about a suitable penance. If the evil one is pointing me towards pleasures, making me sad for the things of God, and having me kind of be sad missing those pleasures that I used to have when I go in that direction, how do I counter that? By some act of penance. It's important to know myself and my own weaknesses and respond in a particular way. To give up something, for example, a penance specifically offered not just for Lent, but for this desolation, as a sacrifice for this desolation. And it may be, how is the Lord distracting me? Maybe it's, on the internet. Well, let me do a fast from the internet for a day and offer it up to the Lord. Okay? That's a penance. But it's a penance specifically designed to counter what I may be experiencing, what's tempting me, what's pulling me back in the other direction. Questions, doubts, confusions on Rule 5 and Rule 6. When in desolation, never make a change to anything that you had decided before the desolation. However, Rule 6, change yourself. Increase prayer. Petition God for help. Meditate on holy things. Spiritual reading, the Scriptures. Examine what's happening. Try to come to understand what you're experiencing so that you can combat it directly with penance if necessary. Questions, doubts, confusions? Yes, sir.
Mother Teresa, as holy as she was, 40 years. You know, that's how do we stand a chance?
Again, and it brings up an important point, and again, I think it's a misunderstanding. It's a I think one of the lies of the evil one that creeps into us is, if I'm a holy person, everything is supposed to be just right in my life, and I'm supposed to be experiencing consolation all the time. That's a lie. It's just not true. It's just not true. The history of the saints show it's just not true. It's just not true. Experiencing consolation and desolation are both part of the ordinary experiences of the spiritual journey, of the spiritual life. We're supposed to experience both. God gives us one and He allows the other. Both are lessons in holiness for us. Both are lessons in holiness for us. There are those He calls to a particular vocation that includes extraordinary desolation. There are those He calls to have a particular connection to His cross, to His passion. Saints who receive the stigmata, Francis, Padre Pio. Okay, we don't all have that. Okay. But having open gaping wounds on your hands would not by most people be considered a good thing. But it was an extraordinary call in his life to experience that, to be so united with the passion of Christ that he even had a physical manifestation in his life. Teresa, in her letters, in her letters to her spiritual directors, said, if I ever become a saint, I will be the saint of darkness. I will be the saint for those who are stuck in darkness. So she saw a vocation in that. She saw calling in that. And though she herself was experiencing that darkness, she was a tremendous vehicle of joy. She just beamed with joy. But herself, her own self, was all the more removed. And this heart deep within of Christ, this piece right there, expanded. So that she wasn't experiencing it herself, but she emptied herself of herself, and he just filled that heart. So that it was his joy that was coming through her, even though somehow bypassing her experience of it through her. So all of us are called to experience consolations and desolations. God's work is in it all. And it doesn't mean because I'm in desolation, it doesn't mean that I'm not moving towards holiness. Very often, by my own experience, it's precisely the moments of desolation where I learn the most and grow the most, if you respond rightly to the Spirit and receive the lesson.
I would say too, Father, if you didn't experience separation like you said, and grow, you become a certain place,
Sure,
sure we just hold on.
If everything were always good, it wouldn't be much growth. There wouldn't be much growth. Growth, formation happens in the struggle. Formation happens in the struggle. When I was working with special ed, if there's a space that's just beyond their ability, but not much, but just beyond where they need a little structured help, a little structured support, that's where growth happens. If I want to reach my glasses from here, well, I'm setting myself up to fail. I can't do that. It's impossible. But if I want to reach them from here, well, that didn't take anything. I didn't grow. It's right there. but it's just beyond my reach, and I can't quite get it, but if someone puts their hand on my shoulder and helps me just a little bit, I can reach. Well, then growth just took place. And eventually, I'll be able to reach that on my own. But it's in that stretch that growth happens, educationally. Spiritually, we can grow through both consolation and desolation, but very often, by my own experience, it's the stretch that comes from desolation where you really see the growth. You may not see it until you get out of it to the consolation, and usually by my own experience, if desolation is lasting a while, I keep thinking to myself, okay, well, I guess I haven't learned a lesson yet. And once I learn the lesson, boom, the desolation comes. Like, okay, I wish I had figured that out a little bit earlier. But so both are part of the spiritual life. And if we're standing before the created world, the created reality, my life experience with indifference, then both are good if they lead me deeper towards God. So both are good insofar as they lead me towards the goal for which I have been created, happiness with God forever. All right, if you have the book, again, look at chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. Again, don't go forward ahead of the book. That's going to talk about the 4 rules that we looked at today. You can get it, again, it's on Amazon. Any regular bookstore would be able to order it for you. Barnes & Noble or whichever. Is that the one? Which orders those? Barnes & Noble is going, right? Any of those should be able to order for you. You don't have to have the book, but it is helpful because it gives a lot of examples. And again, in the coming week, think about, pray with these rules that we looked at today, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and let's talk about your experience of them when we get back next week. Thank you guys. Oh, yeah. Okay. Guys, so you know, you want the textbook itself. In the bulletin, it says something about a reader's guide. It's the textbook itself that you want, not the reader's guide. When you want to get both, get both. If you want to get one, get the actual book itself, not the guide. Okay? Yeah. Yes,